For decades, we've been told to brace for impact, for a new kind of war, a digital apocalypse. But what if the entire way we think about cyber conflict is just wrong? Okay, let's get into it. So this all kicked off way back in 1993 with this really stark prediction. The idea was simple, but honestly pretty terrifying. Conflict was about to be revolutionized. The weapons of the future weren't going to be bombs and bullets, but bits and bytes. A whole new domain of warfare was supposedly opening up. And for the 30 years since then, that warning has just been echoing. We've been told to fear a cyber Pearl Harbor, a single catastrophic digital strike that could bring a whole nation to its knees. But here's the thing, here's the mystery. It's never happened. I mean, we've seen cyber attacks for sure, lots of them, but nothing that has ever strategically decided a conflict. So what gives? Well, this gap between what we expected and what's actually happened, it suggests we might be using the wrong map to understand all this. A new theory proposes that the reason we haven't seen this cyber apocalypse is because cyber operations aren't a new form of warfare at all. They're actually a new form of something much, much older. And this right here shows the critical distinction. See, warfare is all about force. It's a direct, often very open interaction to make your enemy do something. But cyber operations, they work totally differently. Their mechanism is exploitation. The relationship is indirect, and the interaction is almost always secret. This puts them squarely in the category of a much older instrument of power, subversion. So what is subversion exactly? The easiest way to think about it is like classic espionage. It's not about blowing things up. It's about secretly infiltrating your adversary's own systems, whether they're social, political, or in this case, digital, and then turning those very systems against them. You exploit their own rules and their trust to make their infrastructure do what you want it to do. It's subtle, it's indirect, and it's all about manipulation. And this, right here, is where it gets really crucial. Because subversion is so subtle and indirect, it's governed by a really powerful set of constraints. It is not some magical win button. It's an instrument that forces any attacker, digital or otherwise, into this inescapable trade-off, which is known as the subversive trilemma. So every subversive operation, and that includes every cyber attack, has to balance three competing variables. First up, you've got speed. How quickly can you actually make something happen? Second is intensity. How big of a bang can you make? That means both how bad the damage is and how many targets you can hit. And third, there's control. How well can you manage the whole thing to make sure it does exactly what you want it to and, nothing you don't? And here's the punchline. This is the absolute core of the trilemma. You can prioritize one of these. Maybe you can even get two. But you can never have all three at the same time. If you push hard on one, the others are going to give. Let's break down how that works. All right, let's say you want to move fast. If you prioritize speed, you're definitely cutting corners. You've got less time for reconnaissance, less time to really understand the system you're targeting. And that means you're way more likely to make mistakes, lose control of the operation, and the best you can probably hope for is a pretty limited low-intensity impact. Okay, but what if you want to go big? If you prioritize intensity, you're aiming for a massive effect. But to build that kind of operation, you need a lot of time for development and recon. So you're sacrificing speed. And the bigger the operation gets, the more complex it is, and the more likely you are to get discovered or for the whole thing to just spin out of your control. And finally, what if you want to be a surgeon? To prioritize control is to create a precise, perfectly executed operation. But this requires an incredible amount of patience. I mean, the famous Stuxnet attack, for example, is estimated to have taken 5 years to develop. So that means you sacrifice speed. And to maintain that level of control and avoid getting caught, you have to limit the scale of the attack, which means you're sacrificing intensity. Now, this is a great theory, but does it actually hold up in the real world? Well, to find out, we can look at one of the most intense cyber conflict zones on the planet. It's been a real-world test lab for these ideas, the long-running Russo-Ukrainian conflict. Since 2014, Russia has launched a series of major cyber operations against Ukraine. And these weren't just random hacks. They were really sophisticated attempts at sabotage and disruption. We're talking about everything from trying to derail an election to shutting down the power grid not once, but twice, and even unleashing one of the most destructive pieces of malware we've ever seen. And this table right here, this shows the trilemma in action. Just look at the trade-offs. The 2014 election hack was fast, but it failed because they had low control. The power grid attacks, they aimed for intensity, but they took years to develop and were quickly neutralized. And NotPetya? Well, it went for speed and intensity, and it resulted in a catastrophic loss of control. The common thread here is that in almost every single case, the strategic impact was negligible. Let's zoom in on that first power grid attack back in 2015. This was a huge event, a landmark event, where the attackers were clearly prioritizing high intensity. And on the surface, they absolutely succeeded, plunging 230,000 people into darkness in the middle of winter. That sounds like the beginning of a cyber war, right? But here's the trilemma at work. It took them over a year and a half to prepare for that attack, and even then, they didn't have full control. Workers at the old Soviet-era plants just walked over and manually flipped the switches back on. Power was restored within 6 hours. A really scary event, for sure, but strategically insignificant. Okay, now for a totally different kind of trade-off, let's look at the NotPetya attack from 2017. This operation went for both speed and intensity, but to get that, the attackers gave up something absolutely critical: control. See, the malware was designed as a worm, which means it was built to spread automatically from one computer to the next. The attackers basically lit a digital match and just threw it into the wind. And it worked a little too well. It didn't just hit its targets in Ukraine. It escaped and caused billions of dollars in collateral damage all around the globe, hitting huge corporations from the shipping giant Maersk to the pharmaceutical company Merck. Its massive scale wasn't a feature, it was a bug, a catastrophic loss of control. So, what does all of this mean for the future of conflict? The subversive trilemma gives us a completely new lens. It suggests we're not witnessing some revolution in warfare, but an evolution. First things first, it means we can let go of the cyber war myth. Cyber operations just are not the decisive, revolutionary weapons that we were promised. They don't operate by the logic of force and destruction that defines actual warfare. Instead, they're the next step in the long, long history of subversion and espionage. They are a powerful tool, absolutely, but they're a tool that is fundamentally constrained by those timeless, inescapable trade-offs between speed, intensity, and control. And this brings us to a new and pretty challenging reality, a state some have started calling unpeace. The threat isn't one single massive cyber Pearl Harbor. The real threat is a persistent, grinding, low-level digital conflict that just never stops. It's a world of constant espionage, sabotage, and influence campaigns, a forever war that's being fought in the shadows. Which leaves us with a final, lingering question. If cyber conflict isn't a war that can be won, but instead it's a permanent condition that just has to be managed, what does victory even look like? In a world of constant subversion, how do you win a conflict that has no battles and no end?